Welcome to Fixing with Friends. Today we're not fixing anything at all. We're actually going to be celebrating 100 subscribers and of course the holidays. To celebrate, we're going to be chatting about some upgrades that you should consider if you own a first generation Fairlady Z. That's a 240Z, a 260Z, and a 280Z. They're also referred to as an S30, and that's really the Fairlady Zs that are built from 1969 all the way to 1978. There are this many of upgrades that we'll be chatting about today. I haven't decided how many there are, but I'm sure there will be a number here, and it'll tell you. And we're doing this to celebrate the fact that we've hit 100 subscribers, and I believe around now we're sitting at about 104, or this many. It's not 104, is it? It's close though, I think. Anyway, that tells you one thing, one very important thing, and that's that masochists exist after all. Hello. Unlike most videos on this topic, we're not going to be chatting about how you can cram over 700 horsepower into an L28 engine and then, flying to the moon with it. We're going to be chatting about functional quality of life upgrades. They are also safety upgrades to your vehicle. Unless you want to keep your vehicle perfectly stock, these are the upgrades that you should really consider doing. So, with that out of the way, let's get to it. When you first get your car and you turn on the headlights and you're driving in the dark, you'll notice that the lights aren't very bright in the interior or the headlights. And if you tap on the gas, sometimes they will get brighter or dimmer. Now, this happened to me and I replaced the voltage regulator. That didn't fix anything. So what instead I did was swap the alternator. A lot of the older Japanese cars don't have very high amperage alternators compared to North American vehicles, which at the time have lots of electronic features, electric seats, electric windows, giant stereo systems, fancy suspension, all that jazz. The 240 will come with, I believe it's a 50 amp alternator, whereas commonly on a North American vehicle you'll see around 100 amps. So it doesn't need to be 100 amps, but if you wanted to put in a giant stereo and a bunch of other accessories that are electronic, you should do that. However, the easiest upgrade is to simply use a 300ZX alternator. They're easily available, relatively cheap, and they're a 70 amp alternator. But just with that switch to the more modern alternator, it produces a more reliable output, so it's a good swap to do. On the same topic, the headlights themselves can also be replaced because the headlamp bulbs that are a sealed beam unit, like the old style, they're not particularly bright. In fact, there were some lawsuits as well about the lifetime of them being less than advertised, and it's quite a bit of a nuisance to take them in and out. Now, because it's shared with the Jeep, there's a huge number of aftermarket options available. You can get LED bulbs, you can get fancy, new looking ones, or you can just have a plain simple one where you can fit a newer socket bulb in. So that upgrade is substantially beneficial for safety at night. Another upgrade for lighting, as we've actually done, is to remove the lighting caps from behind the gauges, and then it produces more light that way. Or alternatively, while you're at it, switching them out to LEDs. Now you can also make them variable brightness. That's something that we'll actually be doing in the future. For now, that's, if you upgrade those, you'll be able to see your gauges a lot better, because they're pretty dark, and that's not helpful at all. So again, that goes in with safety, convenience, and also style, if you want to make it look cooler. The next upgrade is to wire your side marker lamps as indicators. That way, people who are beside you will actually be able to tell that you're trying to change lanes. It is especially beneficial because the vehicles only come with one side mirror. So every little bit helps. And I've just mentioned another upgrade, which is throwing in another mirror. So whether it's doing the Japanese style fender mirrors or throwing in a passenger side mirror. So it's just cutting a couple holes and doing that. There's quite a bit of safety to be gained. There have been a lot of upgrades over the years for vehicles as a whole, and that's something to consider. Staying on the topic of electronics, one of the upgrades that people really recommend is to switch out the coils. There are some aftermarket coils available that have more windings and can produce a better spark for the engine. It's, it might not sound like much, but it could mean the difference between your car starting and not starting when it's cold outside. The coil swap is nice and simple. All you have to do is unplug it, undo, I believe, 2 screws and the bracket it's held in, and then just slide a new one in, tighten it down, plug everything back on, and you're done. It's pretty easy. So with that, obviously you'd want to make sure your plugs are gapped properly and that you're using more modern plugs, because if you don't and you're using the cheap plugs, they might burn out. So, use good plugs if you're going to upgrade the coil. But also just use good plugs in general, because there's a reason that people don't recommend copper plugs. On that note, the 240Zs and I believe some of the 260Zs, someone correct me if I'm incorrect there, it's a mouthful. They still have, I believe, a points ignition system, which is not well regarded or particularly reliable. So a common upgrade is to swap to a 280Z distributor for a 240Z. Or you can go even further and swap to, I believe it's a 280ZX. On top of the fact that coils will help you out in the winter, there are 3 other upgrades that I would highly suggest if you are planning on driving your car in the winter like myself, because they do actually surprisingly handle quite well in the snow, which, most people these days will hear rear-wheel drive and imagine a vehicle spinning like a top, but these are very easy to handle. I believe because of the weight distribution has actually more of the weight into the back of the car than in the front, or either way it's very close to 50-50, so you don't end up in a situation like if you're driving a pickup truck where there's no weight in the back and a huge engine in the front, and then anytime you turn the back end is coming up to meet you. So to help stop that, this is an upgrade that most people will suggest, is the tires. So getting good winter tires, obviously, and there's also a tire size. So if you get wider tires, now the maximum you can put on stock, I believe, is a 235 at the back and only a 215 at the front. Otherwise you'll get rubbing and bad things will happen. That helps with safety and daily operation, driving feel, the ability to go around corners even faster if you were just going to race your car, I guess. Not on the street, that's illegal most places. So that's a good one. The other one is a limited slip differential, and that's because if you understand why you have a limited slip differential, it's to apply more grip to the ground. And so in the winter, when it's icy, you can understand why having only one wheel attempt to propel you would be a bit of a nuisance. As soon as you hit a patch of ice, suddenly you have no grip, whereas if you have a limited slip differential, your ability to move forward is now doubled. So it's good, especially for starting on hills, stuff like that. And the last, no, focus. Alright, now that I have your attention camera, we're going to do this properly. And lastly, for the winter, I would recommend either upgrading your blower motor There are many different options out there, and you can check out the forums, Hybrid Z, or Z if it's an American site, I will grant them that. But it's a Japanese car, so it's Z anyway, or ZO, so I don't care. I really don't care. You can call it whatever you want. So you'll find that in the winter time, your window might start fogging up a little bit, and that's just because there's not a great amount of airflow coming out of that thing. So if you can swap out the motor, I've heard positive things. I believe Honda is one of the ones you can use, or there's a Kia one that would be even newer that would work. And alternatively, or perhaps in conjunction with that, you could take a page from Major Hardware's book, who runs a channel that I watch, and it's kind of cool. I don't know, maybe I'm just weird. So on his channel, he gets a whole bunch of viewer submitted designs for fans, and then he runs them on a test bench to find out how well they perform, and some of them actually have managed to beat mass manufactured designs. So that's cool, and if that's of interest to you, check them out. But we'll get back to this. If you find the idea of less fuel consumption and not driving down the highway at 3,500 RPM appealing, then you should consider swapping your 4-speed transmission to a 5-speed transmission. All you have to do is basically put it in, and we actually have a video on that because I have done that, but it's not out yet, so after the $300 painting adventure we'll be doing that. But yeah, you can, it helps with the convenience and just general livability of your car. If you're buying an older car, longevity becomes a substantial concern. For these especially, rusting is a bit of a problem. And especially for the 240Zs and the 260Zs, you guys should consider immediately upon receipt of your car, or if you have not yet done this, sealing all of the different panels and underbody conjunction bits on your car, with the exception of some drain holes that are needed. That's something that people widely consider as, you get your car, just do it. Because if you don't, rust will get to it eventually, it's not even a question. Now with that, there are some other longevity things you should consider. For example, gravel is a big concern. So if you get, when I first got the car, on the rear fender, just in front of the tire, there were a whole bunch of little tiny chips in the paint, and that was from rocks just pelting the side of the car from the front wheel. It's a pretty easy fix. Get some mud guards, or alternatively you can apply some 3M on there as well. Both would probably be the best idea. And lastly, in terms of longevity, you should consider, like what I'm going to show you in the $300 painting adventure, or just now while we're talking about it, is a modification so that the drain for the cowl actually goes out at the bottom of the car and doesn't just run into the recesses behind your fender. That's what I would suggest anyway. And then with that, we'll go into more of the convenience upgrades, which, again, something that I have done, which is just to apply a screen mesh behind the cowl on the hood, as you will find with most modern cars. And that just prevents a whole bunch of leaves and needles and things from getting under the cowl and then clogging either those drains or getting into your vent, because there's no filter. It'll just blow through the vent and either mess up your motor or grow a tree inside of your car. Who knows? Lots of different things are possible, and none of them are nice. So the screen I would really recommend. It was easy to do. Next, if we're going to be talking about creature comforts, the stereo system is universally regarded as terrible. Most of them, to my knowledge, all of them, are single speaker units stock, and it's one speaker in the trunk, right at the back of the car. Well, there are two upgrades kind of packaged in one there. But one is adding another speaker in the back. In my car, someone had already done that before I got it. So I just changed those to better speakers. And the other upgrade is to replace the stereo deck. And there are ones that can be masked to look more like the traditional ones. And then you can still plug in your USB or whatever. Or you can have a secondary unit, a secondary deck that is the actual useful one, and the other one is just for aesthetics. Either way, the system, you're going to want to change it. It's not good at all. I have my antenna still wired up. One of the previous owners wired it to a manual switch, so that's nice and easy. The motor's not going to burn out that way as well because it's not automatic. You can manually flick it up and down until it reaches the end of its travel. And the antenna actually works very well. But yeah, so switch your stereo deck. You can then also plug in your newer devices to them. It's fantastic. Sound quality, or your sound will be a lot louder if you have more speakers. People also put speakers up near the front or under the dash, subs under the seat, whatever takes your fancy with that, you can do that. But basically the bare minimum is you should change your stereo deck. Or if you really like it, just leave it as is. But again, these are just the sort of widely accepted things that Datsun owners do. Just in terms of convenience for any of you who do maintenance on your own vehicles, which I assume would be most of you, if you're like me, you don't really like dealing with drums because they're kind of a nuisance. I mean, sometimes pads are a nuisance too. Just look at Amanda's car. But one of the more convenient things you can do for yourself is upgrade the rear brakes so that they're discs. And there are a few different options. I think Willwood might have a rear brake kit. If not, we should be asking them for one because everyone would want it. But also there's a conversion, I believe, to a S14 rear brake. There's a conversion to a Maxima rear caliper, I think, as well. Anyway, there are a bunch of different options. If you are interested, check those out. That is one of the bigger modifications in this list. A great convenience upgrade that I have mentioned in the past is soundproofing. The car only comes with a very small amount of actual soundproofing, and that's a little bit of fiberglass kind of smeared over the firewall, and then the floor mats. There's some foam on your headliner. It's not very dense, but it is there, I guess. But you know, if you can throw some undercoating or bed liner, whatever your preference is, in the doors and the panels, that would probably help substantially. But if you can also put in some actual soundproofing foam or whatever fancy insulation they have that you can just stick on, that's going to make the ride a lot more pleasant for you. You can listen to those tunes that are being pumped out way at the back of the car. So lastly, one that would be difficult to accomplish, but absolutely fantastic to every single Datsun owner, would be a plastic fuel tank. As they exist now, steel tanks, they rust over time. It's just a thing that happens. And many owners have lodged complaints on the internet about the fact that their car isn't running properly because the fuel lines and injectors are all clogged with rust. Now, a plastic tank is pretty easy to make, they're pretty cheap to make, and while you're at it, you could get the upgrade of having an in-tank fuel pump, and that would be just fantastic. So, if you know anyone who makes plastic fuel tanks, give them a call and tell them there are thousands of customers waiting for you to do that. Because $80 for a plastic fuel tank, it's about the same as a normal fuel tank, but it's lighter, you don't have to worry about the rust, it's less likely to explode if a random piece of metal hits it. There's plastic fuel tanks, that'd be great. Anyway, Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. Is it Kwanzaa as well? Kwanzaa. Happy holidays. There are many holidays, and I don't know all of them off the top of my head anymore, but I hope that it's a fantastic holiday season for you. And see you next time.